Well, David Rowan's parting gift to me was to say to squeeze the balls of John in order to ask him some tough questions. That's a journalistic thing, apparently. Welcome to this session. It's a bit of a hard act to follow that game show. My name is Ravi Mattu.
A game show format.
We could do, yes, indeed, but I think that we can't top Kara Swisher in a gold cape, can we really? Stripe, really interesting company, really interesting time to talk about them. I'm just going to rattle off a few kind of stats around this to kick us off. Founded in 2011 by John and his brother, Patrick, two brothers who were studying in the US, grew up in rural Ireland, essentially taught themselves to code by convincing their parents to buy them a satellite hookup so they could access the internet, from what I understand. Obviously, rather precocious pair. Went to the States. One went to Harvard, one went to MIT, and they both dropped out to create this company, which 6 years on was valued on its most recent funding raising round at $9 billion. Operates in 25 countries, more than 130 currencies are traded and used on this platform. So I'm just going to kick off. John can explain much better what his company does than I can. What led you guys to believe that you could be mini Zuckerbergs yourself, quitting college and creating this company? What started that process?
Well, I'm not sure anyone sets out to create a large company necessarily. I think certainly in our case, we set out to solve a very specific problem. And I think one thing that was helpful was that we were the target customer. We were software developers, we were building an online business, and it was frightfully hard to actually get the business part off the ground and accept money. And so we had found the most interesting problem, the meta problem of being able to start online businesses, and we just went and started solving that.
Right, and just to be clear, you're often described or have been historically as a payments company. You're much more than that. We'll get into that a little bit later. But just in terms of a company that wanted to use and deploy your services, they're able to access your code and kind of put it into their system. Explain very briefly how that works, because I think it differentiates you from some other kind of players in this space.
Sure. So you can think of Stripe as a software platform for starting an online business. And the very first thing back in 2011 that we started with was accepting payments, specifically credit card payments. That was the primary blocker that we saw businesses running into. What we quickly realized, though, was that, sure, that was one instance of the problem, but there are many more along the way between, actually being able to store customer data, actually being able to run, these more complex internet-specific business models like the sharing economy companies, the online marketplaces like Uber, Lyft, Grab Taxi, Airbnb, or subscription startups or something like that, solving fraud, all these kind of things. And so now we actually end up selling a huge amount of technology to these businesses, most recently for incorporating their companies, and it just got started with payments.
Right, so in a way, I heard someone describe you and say it's almost like a startup kit for people who want to found companies.
Yes, it's a toolkit for starting and growing your internet business.
Right, and again, you started with payments. One of the things that I think always surprises me, and we've met before at the FT, and you talked about how small the number of payments done online currently is. What's the exact percentage? Give us some sense of just, because it kind of indicates the market opportunity that you're talking about.
Yeah, so to give you some context, you can imagine if you're starting this company in 2011 and say you're talking to investors and you're trying to convince them that this is a going concern, I think that there was a real sentiment back then that this is solved, this is done, Stripe is a way to accept money online. And it's like, wait, I thought we already had that. Whereas in fact, if you look at the macro stats, about 5% of global consumer spending happens online today. And so what that means is that the vast majority of customers that are coming to Stripe are not switching from someone else. We don't have to kind of compete with other companies to gain market share. Instead, it's all net new online commerce, and we're bringing commerce onto the internet.
Right. And so you mentioned this idea about the toolkit. One of the most recent products you've launched is something called Atlas, which enables essentially non-US companies to incorporate in the US. Why did you go down that route rather than thinking, okay, we've got a payments platform, the key enabler of any business is how do you actually accept money? Why didn't you kind of implement that elsewhere, and why did you go for that Atlas option?
Yeah, so in general, The correct way to understand Stripe is to realize that one thing we're really interested in is the rate of new business formation and how we can help more companies get started. In that I think if we were just replacing other companies, that wouldn't be that interesting, whereas the primary metric we use for thinking about how we've succeeded is, are we growing the size of the internet economy? And one of the ways you can do that is help more businesses get started. And I'm personally, I think it'd be quite worrisome if the general direction the online economy took was this rich get richer effect of, you have Apple and Amazon and Facebook and Google and all these very successful and admirable companies, but I don't think you want all the new innovation to happen as like arms of those conglomerates rather than new businesses being able to succeed. And so we're very interested in that question, how we help more businesses get started. One thing we saw was that there was all this entrepreneurial talent outside the United States, and especially, it's like that New Yorker cartoon from a while ago, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. It was a little bit like that for us growing up in Ireland, where we got a satellite internet connection, we had learned to code from a lot of online resources. There's a huge amount of potential, a large number of software developers, a lot of entrepreneurial talent spread out across the world. And so our idea with Atlas was to help bring those people into the online economy and give them everything we needed. And so concretely, I think everyone can talk about these lofty goals. It has to then translate into a very concrete product. And so what Atlas is incorporate a US Delaware corporation, get tax and legal advice, get a US bank account to actually be able to collect money, and get a Stripe account for payments. And that was something that if you talk to any entrepreneurs, it was incredibly complicated and a huge hassle, and you were just dealing with these lawyers and financial institutions who didn't really get online businesses before, and so trying to simplify that to unlock that entrepreneurial potential globally.
And this kind of goes to the heart a little bit, to a large extent, about your platform. You want to be very much partnerships with other organizations, collaborative, rather than creating everything yourself and being a closed system. Is that right? Because you partner with Alipay, Apple, et cetera, to kind of enable those services as well as kind of what Atlas enables, right?
Absolutely. And if you look at how the Stripe business model works, I think it's a very good thing to be betting on is the rate of new business innovation and kind of partnering with new businesses where they're bringing the product to market, you're just giving them the enabling infrastructure. It's a little bit, you can think of it as analogous to, we're built on Amazon Web Services, and we started off as a tiny customer of theirs, just self-service, and now we still are built on Amazon Web Services, and it's been a big part of helping us succeed. It's a little bit similar with Stripe, where you're there for them at the beginning. You have this self-service product that they can pluck the necessary components off the shelf, but it also scales with the business as they grow.
One of the things we've talked a lot about your own journey, your own experience, but also the enabling stuff. You obviously will have a lot of insight into the way entrepreneurship is working kind of beyond the valley. You're based in San Francisco, even though you guys are Irish. You've lived there for some time now. I believe you still live together, right? You and Patrick, in your flat, which can be profiled in the FT for some kind of funny reason. Give us some sense of how you're seeing Europe right now. There's obviously a lot of impetus to encourage entrepreneurship, innovation. Where do you see Europe sitting in terms of that ecosystem, and what are the things some of the trends that you're seeing in the data that you're kind of able to access and collect?
Yeah, so we're now exposed through the hundreds of thousands of businesses built on Stripe to some of the macro trends that are going on. And there are some country-specific trends that we see. And so, for example, this fintech revolution in London that people talk about very much is real. There are a large number of kind of successful fintech companies starting up, I think in part thanks to the regime there that's friendly to them. I think the more general business strategy that we're interested in when it comes to Europe is this idea of when you start an internet company, you're starting it global first. You're not focusing on the local market, which is everyone's first instinct. And of course, German SMBs in the offline world have had this idea for decades. You have the Mittelstand companies, which are maybe operating in a niche, but are the global leader in their niche and are part of a very big and successful supply chain. And we see an increasing number of those kinds of companies in the online world where, thanks to the distribution dynamics, they can be the global leader in whatever it is they're doing. And so you have the big companies, obviously, that get all the headlines. You have Waze in Israel, or Spotify in Stockholm, or Atlassian in Sydney, and kind of companies like this. But for every one of those big successful tech companies that gets the headlines, there's 100 smaller, less sexy, less exciting ones that are actually really contributing and forming a really important part of the internet value chain, but maybe not getting as much attention.
I mean, you're pretty down in repeated interviews. You talk a lot about the hype cycle and the need to kind of realize that the business is beyond the kind of ones that get all the headlines that deserve attention. I mean, is that what you're targeting? Those kind of companies to really try to build and make, well, the ones that maybe aren't necessarily kind of immediately thinking global, immediately thinking online. Are you trying to target those ones that are maybe below the, not all about machine learning, not all about AI, but actually other companies that are doing more mundane things like construction?
Yeah, like I said, there will always be a significant number of companies that are maybe beyond the current set of things that are exciting to talk about. So one of the things I was mentioning is that people talk about the head of the sharing economy platform companies, and so the ride-sharing companies and Airbnb and things like this. But one thing people don't realize is that this is a very general trend, the idea that you can have a broker of supply that provides, what do these marketplaces provide? They provide discovery, they provide liquidity, they provide a trust and safety mechanism, they have inbuilt payments, so it's really convenient. And sure, that can apply to ride-sharing, which we all as consumers are very familiar with, but then there's this huge long tail of opportunities that are being brought into the online world too. You have everything from there's a construction company on Stripe that if you have a JCB, you can now generate revenue from that JCB rather than having it sitting idle. And again, that's the kind of thing that people don't necessarily, journalists don't want to write about, but it's actually really meaningful in terms of driving growth.
And you're also partnering, I mean, the other aspect which is interesting, so you're not talking just about startups. I mean, the aspect of entrepreneurship or kind of innovation for big companies. We spoke earlier about some of the stuff you're doing with Daimler and the NFL and how they're trying to catch up and try to connect the dots between kind of big manufacturing companies and basically these kind of fast turnaround startups. How's that work in your context?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, everywhere we're seeing that there's sort of battles going on between incumbents and startups, because as the platform shifts happen, as stuff moves online, and then just as people have adapted to the online world, stuff moves to mobile, you have large established companies trying to react to that. And so one adoption pattern we see is that while startups generally choose Stripe because it provides them with a huge amount of useful technology, it provides them with the platform to go global, we also see these large companies ending up using Stripe because they need to compete with startups not only on what they're doing, but they need to compete on the time cycle that the startups are working on, which is, you're shipping every day or you're shipping every week, as opposed to the traditional big company cycle of shipping over much longer periods. And so concretely, it's things like we have Daimler is building a ride-sharing platform on Stripe, which I think is pretty cool, not just watching, kind of sitting by and watching the startups do it.
How do the big traditional financial services sector, how do they deal with you guys then? How do they perceive you? Are you kind of the thing that they're freaked out about? Do you engage with them? Do they understand what you're trying to do?
We engage with them, and I think many Silicon Valley companies are not that serious about or are not that good at partnering, whereas we view partnering as something that we have to take pretty seriously, because fundamentally, we are not managing the end-to-end ourselves. Stripe lets you accept credit card payments or accept direct debit or accept Alipay or something like that, and so we need to be able to partner with all the other entities in this ecosystem. It kind of doesn't work if you want to own the whole thing yourself, and so we end up working with a large number of other financial institutions, and I think also they kind of get that Stripe is this technology platform for developers. We're helping these new internet businesses. They didn't really have the skill set to be able to provide that before, and so I think it feels less competitive to them than something like a lending platform, which is more core.
When we talk about kind of one of the big trends that we spoke about earlier was this whole idea of mobile, obviously, and which is the kind of, we're not even at the foothills yet of this whole shift, are we? Apple Pay, you obviously have been involved in, but also Alipay. Can you give us a sense of how those have picked up? What sort of trends are picking up? I mean, how fast are they growing? How successful are they? And how, in particular the case of Alipay, how's that playing out for maybe some of the people that are using you to access that service?
Yeah, so one of the things we're very conscious of, or one of the interesting dynamics for us, is as we launch Stripe in all these new places, like we launched in Singapore and Japan and places like this over the past year, not only do we need to localize the product from a language point of view, but cultures are different in all these new countries, and just payment dynamics are different in all these new countries. And so one of the things we're doing in Europe is beta testing direct debit and things like this. So the biggest change is the one you mentioned, is Apple Pay, which has been coming along the pipe. And when you think about it, there's first-order effects and second-order effects of Apple Pay. The first-order effect is that conversions on mobile are up because you're going from people having to fill out this crazy laborious form on their phone to actually just being able to authenticate with Touch ID. I think what's more interesting, and we actually haven't seen play out, and is the opportunity for all the entrepreneurs here, is that now that there's been an order of magnitude decrease in the friction when it comes to actually selling anything on mobile, new kinds of businesses are possible that weren't possible previously. And so I was teasing Ravi before this about the Financial Times paywall because I really want to read his articles.
I'm not in product, okay? It's not my fault.
I really want to read his articles, but they make it so darn hard.
Yeah.
But now you can build new kinds of kind of content platforms or new kinds of content startups now that the dynamics around selling things on mobile have changed. And so I would say we've seen lots of examples of the first order effects, which is just conversions going up in that, we talked to one user whose mobile conversions doubled as a result of Apple Pay. I think we're very early in seeing the second order effects, which is what are the businesses that were not possible before that now are?
Right, and also in terms of China in particular and Alipay, I'm quite interested in because obviously you've enabled the through Atlas this kind of process of going in the US, but obviously China is this crazy market which is massively problematic for many tech companies. How have you've gone in obviously in partnering with a big local player. You're evidently not going in at least for the time being, in a big way, because presumably it's complicated. How are you seeing the impact of that in terms of if you're an entrepreneur and you want to use Stripe to access the Chinese market, how does it work? Yeah, so there's a long history of companies, US companies, entering China and not taking it seriously enough and I mean, not doing well there, and we're not particularly eager to add our names to that list. And so there are some regions like Europe where we have kind of big teams we've hired here. We're really going after the market in a serious way. China, we're more interested right now in, for our Western users, helping them sell into the Chinese market. And so that's where our partnership with Alipay comes in. You could see us partner with others over time. I mean, it's working great for the users who want to sell into China. That was a region that wasn't open to you before, that now is, because you can actually access those consumers who don't use Western payment methods. But it's not our China strategy, if you will. I'm seeing like a minute and a half on this monitor, so I'm assuming that's correct. Give us a sense of two things, if we can project into the future. One is, what's the future for you? What next? You've obviously launched Atlas, which is a very different product to an online payments platform. What do you think the next big product you might launch is? What are you guys looking at? What markets are you looking at? What are you going to do with all that money you've raised? Two, what are some of the big future trends that you think that entrepreneurs need to be thinking about in order to stay ahead of the curve?
So in terms of our future, we are very interested in, again, this question I referenced earlier of we don't want it to result in a few large companies end up kind of controlling the online economy, how we can make sure that we're supporting new businesses. And it really is quite relevant. I mean, as we look at the German market, there are more Germans employed in online and in tech than in the car industry. Like, it really is a large market, but I don't think people have figured out when it comes to the startup scene, when it comes to companies going global, there's still clearly a lot to be solved there, and there's a lot of opportunity for us to participate, hopefully in some kind of useful way. And so in the short term, on the list are things like launch Stripe in Germany. Over the longer term, you will see us move much further beyond payments to handling more of the back office tasks, handling more of the business tasks, whether it's incorporation, whether it's preventing fraud, whether it's handling more of the customer relationship for you so that you can actually focus on the business. And both for young founders, startups, as well as big companies as well? Do you see massive potential in big companies, or is that kind of... Exactly, yeah. I mean, everyone from literally a new startup to SAP uses Stripe, so I mean, the whole range. And then finally, just projecting in terms of entrepreneurship more generally, I mean, what trends, where do you think are the biggest markets? What do you think the biggest things that are coming down the road? Don't mention AI, but apart from that, where do you see the big shifts coming in the next few years? So it feels like every time you have a major platform shift, like a new enabling technology, there are a whole bunch of startups that are possible as a result of that. And sometimes, there are new platforms that emerge from that, and it starts kind of a new technological shift all over again. And so the major ones you can look at are, the internet emerging. Arguably, Google was so significant that it was another platform shift again. Mobile is another one. I think we're not fully done with the mobile opportunity, in that, we still see in 2016 new companies emerging that this opportunity wasn't possible before because, enough people didn't have mobile phones. Now it's possible. The obvious one that you have to call out that is very relevant relevant is, one, deep learning getting good enough for image recognition, video recognition, and voice recognition feels like it will result in a new platform shift just because of the number of things that are now possible. Like definitely the aha moment for me was, I don't know if you guys have played with Google Photos, but it's just a completely different kind of product as a result of how good the image recognition is when it comes to photos, and what are the other products that you couldn't build before now that thanks to this platform shift you can.
Well, 10 years after the launch of the iPhone, which definitely was the last big moment, it's a good moment to say thank you very much to John. I'm sure he'll be around to answer questions from you guys in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.